Undercover boss orders bagel at coffee shop frozen, as waitress says hunger makes her dizzy. That morning, a light drizzle misted the glass window, leaving behind small droplets like beads of sweat yet to dry. In that space, the CEO of a famous coffee shop chain, a man around 50 with silver strands in his hair, but eyes that still sparkled with the sharpness of someone who had poured his heart into building the brand, sat pensively on an old, wooden chair right by the bar. He had once been affectionately called Boss Michael by his employees. He was known as a dedicated leader who always believed that success wasn't measured solely by profit but also by the happiness of those who sweated over every cup of coffee, every freshly baked pastry. The early days of that brand were still vivid in Michael's memory. He clearly remembered those sunlit mornings when the warm glow of the overhead lights hit the freshly painted bar. He had refinished himself just to make it feel more welcoming. He remembered rolling up his sleeves, dusting powdered sugar over a hot bagel, and the bright laughter of the staff ringing out like a cheerful morning song. That coffee shop had once been a place where every employee called each other by name, where each workday began with a handshake and a sincere smile. But then success arrived, and with it, it also swept Michael away from those warm mornings. Branch after branch sprouted up, and the brand expanded across the city, reaching into every bustling street. Endless meetings, thick stacks of revenue reports, and dry numbers on a laptop screen gradually claimed his heart, the same heart that once fluttered at the whirring sound of the espresso machine, signaling the start of a new day. This morning, as he sat in a high-floor meeting room, staring at blinking revenue columns on the screen, Michael felt his heart turn cold. He remembered the story of the waitress who once made him laugh with her cheeky wit of the young barista who always cracked jokes whenever he complimented the latte. Now those images faded behind Excel files and the endless queue of unanswered emails. Michael wondered, have I forgotten the bright eyes of those who once called this place their second home? He sighed, softly closed the laptop, and stood up with a determination to find the answer. Michael put on his worn gray flannel shirt, donned the old baseball cap he used to wear when he worked the kitchen. Walking down the long, empty hallway, he took a deep breath, trying to recapture the feeling of the old days, when he was just a man behind the bar brewing the first hot cup of coffee each morning to warm not just others' hearts, but his own. The thick glass door of a local Sunrise coffee shop branch, the brand he had once written with every drop of sweat and hope, came into view. The sign with its shiny logo still gleamed the image of a golden bagel hanging neatly above the entrance. Michael pushed the door open, and the jingle of the wind chime rang out like an old greeting he hadn't heard in a long time. The faint aroma of bagels mixed with the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. The warm yellow light shone down on the old wooden tables, revealing scratches like the marks of countless ups and downs. The espresso machine hissed out a familiar but distant sound, reminding him of those sunlit mornings when everything was simple, when people still greeted each other with heartfelt good mornings. Asterisk, asterisk, Michael scanned the entire shop with his eyes. He was searching for familiar faces, for the lively laughter of the staff, for the image of a second home. But instead, he saw only tired eyes, drooping shoulders, and hurried steps, as if everyone were trying to escape from something. The laughter that used to echo through the shop now lingered only in his memory. His gaze stopped at the bar, the place where he had once personally made coffee for customers, which now felt unfamiliar. A young girl stood behind the counter, dark circles visible beneath her eyes, her hands moving quickly to wipe a glass, as if to hide her unease. The warm light shone on her slightly messy hair, revealing the toll of many long nights. Every movement of hers seemed to carry a burden yet to be spoken. Michael suddenly realized the smell of bagels was still there, the sound of the espresso machine still rang out, but the warmth that had once defined the brand was gone. Michael sat down at a table by the window, a spot where he used to sit with staff to discuss brand development, a place that once served as the launch pad for many bold plans. But now his hands trembled as he gently gripped the handle of the coffee cup that still held some warmth. His heart silently asked, could it be that I've lost the most precious thing here, the warmth of human connection? Michael sat still on the old wooden chair, his eyes fixed on the bar, where everything seemed to slow down on a morning filled with the smell of baked goods and coffee steam. He ordered a bagel and a hot coffee, the simple meal he himself used to prepare for customers. In the faint warmth from the coffee cup, Michael searched for the memories of sunlit mornings, the cheerful laughter by the pastry counter. Soft footsteps sounded behind the bar, blending with the emotionless beep of the POS machine. A young woman, hair messy and eyes shadowed by many long nights of overtime, walked over to Michael's table. Her hair fell loosely over her forehead, partially covering her fatigue but not hiding the dark circles beneath her eyes. The apron she wore seemed faded with coffee stains, stark against the fabric evidence of long, tiring days. She placed the tray on the table, her hands trembling as she set down the crispy bagel and hot coffee in front of him. In that moment, the warm yellow light revealed tiny beads of sweat on her forehead. Michael was about to smile to say a familiar greeting he used to use to greet staff. But her voice came first, soft, choked, and trembling, like a long suppressed sigh. I often have to go so hungry that I feel faint just to make enough hours. Each word was like a cold knife cutting through the thick air. Michael froze. The coffee cup in his hand suddenly tasted bitter, like the pain that had just risen in his chest. A single tear slowly rolled down the girl's cheek, falling onto the bagel tray. That image struck Michael's heart like a hammer blow to someone who had once proudly called this place a second home. That tear blended into the buttery scent of the bagel, blurring every boundary between truth and empty promises. Michael looked at her, his eyes reflecting an unprecedented inner turmoil. His fingers tightened around the coffee cup, the warmth now dissipating into an invisible vapor, leaving behind a bitter taste that spread slowly on his tongue. Around him, the POS machine continued to beep sporadically, and the clinking of spoons against cups sounded colder than ever. Michael looked around the cafe, catching fleeting glances from employees who quickly averted their eyes. The yellow light seemed weaker, shining down on the table where the girl's teardrops still glistened. A teardrop, Michael knew, carried all the shattered hopes of someone who had once believed in this place as a home. Michael leaned back against the wooden chair, his eyes following each step of the staff, feeling more acutely than ever the tense heartbeat of a cafe that had once been a second home to so many. The pale yellow light spilled onto the scratched wooden table, revealing time scars marks that reminded him of early mornings when he would roll up his sleeves behind the counter, smiling and calling each employee by name, giving them not just a job, but also trust. But today what he saw instead were dark shadows creeping into every corner. Near the POS counter, a young male employee wearing a crisp apron and neatly combed hair had a look in his eyes that was so confident it bordered on arrogance. He moved easily between customer tables, a smile fixed on his lips, as if everything in the cafe revolved around him. Michael frowned slightly as he saw the young man approach the POS machine, the greenish glow from the screen, highlighting his features, making his gaze even colder. His fingers danced deftly over the screen, operating it like a true master, but with a hint of cunning. Meanwhile, at the corner of the counter, the young waitress Michael had spoken to that morning, the one whose eyes had shown a hint of hope when she saw him, was busily cleaning table number 4. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered each plate and every crumb of leftover bread. The yellow light fell on her disheveled hair, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes, the mark of long nights, slow shifts, and mornings without even a proper meal. Her gaze seemed to hold all the unspoken struggles, and Michael felt each of her hurried breaths as if she were bracing herself against something she couldn't name. A wave of anger rose in Michael's chest as he looked at the POS screen. He remembered the day he had approved that system with the hope that technology would bring transparency and fairness. But today, that very POS machine has become a tool for cheaters to exploit, turning the deserved tips of hardworking people into rewards for those who know how to manipulate the system. Every tap on the POS screen, every cold glow on that young man's face felt like a dagger, cutting into the trust Michael had once placed here. The POS machine beeped again, an all too familiar sound that now seemed chilling to the bone. A middle-aged customer sitting by the window held the receipt in his hand, his brow furrowing at the tips printed on the slip. He shook his head slightly, and his eyes met Michael's with an unspoken question. Does this place still deserve my trust? Michael could hear his own heart pounding harder, as if the beep of the POS had set the rhythm for his now chaotic pulse. The manager walked by. His gaze, cold as ice, slid over Michael, then stopped on the young waitress. That look was enough to extinguish any faint light of hope in her eyes. Olivia, her name rang in Michael's mind like a painful call. Her shoulders trembled, her eyes lowered, swallowing all the words she hadn't been able to say. Michael saw it clearly. Just one glance from the manager was enough to crush every small hope she had, like the dim yellow light on the cafe ceiling. He looked around the shop, once a second home for dreams and hopes. Every bagel on the display tray still smelled fragrant, but the warmth of old times had vanished. Every corner of the shop now wore the gray hue of suspicion and deceit. Michael lightly squeezed the handle of his coffee cup, his heart heavy. He knew the figures in the reports from the upper floors could never capture what was happening here, where sweat, sighs, and even tears stained the bagel trays. Those numbers, once trusted as proof of growth, had now become an invisible weapon, stabbing straight into the trust and efforts of the people who had built this brand. Michael swallowed hard, his throat dry, as if he'd just drunk a sip of cold coffee. His eyes swept across each face, the staff he once considered family, the ones who used to greet him with the warmest smiles each morning. But today those smiles had been replaced with weary eyes, cautious glances, and a chilling silence that filled every corner of the shop. Near the POS counter, the young employee still stood there holding a tray of bagels, his eyes full of confidence but also a cold glint as if challenging the world itself. He moved his finger quickly across the screen, adjusting something Michael knew all too well. The tips, the sweat, and the effort of people like Olivia, the tips earned with every drop of sweat, every customer's smile, and sometimes just a simple, "Thank you." He took a deep breath, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if counting the chaotic beats in his chest. An older customer stood up, clutching the bill. His gaze met Michael's, shining with doubt. Michael could read in that gaze the unspoken questions. Is this still a place of kindness, or has it become just a place of numbers and fake smiles? In the far corner, Olivia was carefully wiping the old wooden table. The pale yellow light fell on her hair, highlighting each bead of sweat on her forehead, dissolving into the air like unspoken worries. Michael saw her sigh, her frail shoulders trembling, her eyes fixed on the bagel tray, as if letting go of it would make everything shatter. That look was like a faint light in the dark, a whisper. Is there still room for hope here? The POS machine beeped again, the sound hitting Michael's ears like a hammer blow to his memory. Back then, that beep had once been a symbol of transparency, fairness, and the trust he'd placed. But now it was nothing more than a sigh, the silent tears of those who had once believed in him, believed in the dream he had painted. Another staff member, a short-haired girl sitting near the window, glanced at Michael. Her eyes held confusion, as if seeking an answer to a question she hadn't dared to ask. Michael knew if he hesitated even a second longer, all the hope in this place would extinguish like a flickering candle in the rain. The sharp sound of a spoon hitting a cup rang out, echoing through the heavy air. Michael swept his gaze across the shop. Every bagel still smelled fragrant but had grown cold. Every staff member stood there with fear etched into their eyes. Every gray corner reflected the marks of a breakfast shop that had once been a source of pride. The manager walked over, his gaze brushing past Michael before stopping on Olivia. His eyes were as cold as steel, staring straight at the young woman as if to extinguish every last spark of light. Michael saw her small shoulders shrink like a fragile bird, trying to hide from a coming storm. His heart tightened as if an invisible hand were squeezing it. He remembered the old days, the mornings filled with laughter, when every freshly baked pastry carried its own story, a piece of the soul of those behind the counter. Now everything had changed. The laughter had died, replaced by the indifferent beeping of the POS machine, the cold numbers, and the fearful glances. Michael gripped the handle of his coffee cup, the once hot coffee now holding only the warmth of memories and unfulfilled dreams. He knew if he didn't act now, everything he had believed in, everything he had sweated to build, would become nothing more than a distant memory. Michael Foster stood up, the old wooden chair creaking as if waking the entire breakfast shop from its long silent sleep. Every eye turned to him, curious, confused, and even afraid. The clinking of spoons against porcelain plates fell silent, leaving only a stifling hush, like someone had turned down the volume on the whole world. The yellow light fell across Michael's face, highlighting every wrinkle, traces of the nights he spent, calculating wages of the early mornings when he personally spread butter and cream on the bread. His breath quickened, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Today he was no longer just a CEO behind a desk. He was the founder who once personally wiped each table, each dish. That man now stood face to face with his own dream, a dream being strangled by cold numbers. Michael took off his faded baseball cap, his hand trembling slightly, but his eyes were sharp as a blade. I am Michael Foster, the founder of this breakfast shop chain. A wave of murmurs swept through the shop. The manager near the POS counter seemed frozen, his hand still resting on the computer screen. His eyes flickered with panic before darkening as Michael pulled out a thick stack of papers, evidence that could not be denied. The sound of the paper rustling was small but sharp, like the quiet sighs of sweat that had fallen onto the pastry trays, like the silent screams of employees who had once trusted him. Michael raised the stack of papers, the yellow light shining on the bold black letters, altered tip receipts, unfair shift schedules, threatening messages to employees. His voice hardened each word, a dagger slicing through the suffocating air. This is the sweat and tears of all of you stolen by these very managers. The room seemed to freeze. The POS machine beeped, a familiar sound that now rang like a racing heartbeat, reminding everyone that a truth was being revealed. Michael looked straight at the manager, the one he had once trusted with the responsibility of upholding the trust of so many people. His gaze now lowered his shoulders, trembling like a man who had just been unmasked. Michael then turned his eyes to Olivia, the young woman with dark circles under her eyes, but still a spark of hope shining within them. The yellow light fell across her face, and a teardrop glistened like a crystal as it fell onto the bread tray, mixing with the salty sweat of so many days. Olivia clenched the cleaning cloth in her hand, her eyes trembling but brighter than ever. In them, Michael saw both disbelief and a trust that had been trampled, but now finally had a name. Another young employee, the one Michael once taught to make lattes, stood silent, his eyes searching Michael's face, as if looking for a sign of reassurance. Michael nodded, his eyes glinting with a strange light, the light of someone who had once been disappointed but still believed in kindness. The yellow light revealed a bead of sweat rolling down the manager's temple. He stammered, I was just following regulations. Michael shook his head, his voice low but as sharp as steel. No one has the right to trample on the sweat of the people who built this brand. No one. The breakfast shop remained as silent as a grave, only the POS machine beeped once more, this time sounding like the scream of a truth being exposed. Michael knew this moment would rip through every layer of falsehood, leaving the raw reality of a business that had once been called a second home. Michael took a deep breath, his gaze steady and unwavering. The POS machine beeped again, dragging with it a silence that threatened to shatter, like a thin veil of smoke, making every eye in the shop turn toward him. Under the yellow light that still shone on the crispy bread, Michael saw his younger self, the man who once stood behind the counter, calling every employee by name with a warm voice. Now he was here holding a stack of papers that laid bare a truth long buried. His voice dropped, but still echoed throughout the breakfast shop. I know I let this happen. I believe the numbers on the reports could replace your laughter. But today I realize no number can ever measure sweat, tears, and trust. His eyes stopped on Olivia. She stood there, her hands trembling, her eyes shimmering in the yellow light. Another tear fell onto the bread tray, but this time it mingled with a fragile smile at the corner of her lips. Michael nodded at her like a promise unspoken. I hear you, and I will make it right. The manager lowered his head, his shoulders slumping like a broken statue before a storm. Michael turned to the staff, his voice strong and clear, his eyes blazing like a fire. From today, you will no longer have to bow to those who betrayed your trust. From today, every drop of sweat will be respected. A young male employee stood in the corner of the counter, his eyes red, his hand gripping the cleaning cloth, as if holding on to his dream. Michael looked at him, then swept his gaze around the shop, his eyes meeting every face, tired eyes that now seemed to shine with renewed belief. He raised the stack of papers to chest height, his voice ringing out like a solemn vow. I swear this place will once again be a second home, where every effort is recognized. No more lies, no more silent tears. Applause rang out at first, sparse, then building, mingling with sighs of relief. Olivia gently wiped the tear still on her cheek, her eyes shining the eyes of a warrior who had just reclaimed justice. The POS machine beeped once more, but this time it sounded like the music heralding a new chapter. Michael turned, looking at each wooden table, each loaf of bread, each pair of eyes that had once called this place home. He knew that from today there would be difficult conversations, there would be tears of truth, but that was also the first step to rebirth for Sunrise Breakfast Joint. The yellow light fell on his shoulders, the light sketching the figure of a man who had once been deeply connected to every small corner of this breakfast shop. Michael understood that the dream didn't just lie in reports or revenue charts. It lived in the breath and the smell of freshly baked bread and laughter, and above all, in the eyes of the people who had built this place with him. His voice softened, his gaze warmer than ever. We will start again together. I promise. After that day, the waitress with messy hair and tired eyes was vindicated. Her tears and confession were no longer hidden burdens in the dark, but had become the flame that ignited justice. She was now officially promoted to shift manager, a living symbol of the resilience and fairness the breakfast shop had once been built to protect. The POS system, that tool that had once forced her to survive on leftovers, was now upgraded, ensuring transparency down to every last tip. Every coin was no longer just a number on a screen, but a clear testament to the sweat, hard work, and trust of the people who had steadfastly kept this brand alive through every storm. The CEO, once known as a dedicated founder, now stood silently behind the pastry counter. He watched the young woman, now a shift manager, as she trained each new employee with eyes that shone bright. On her face, Michael Foster saw the image of himself in those early days, confident eyes, a sincere smile, and an unwavering belief in the values he had once pursued. He understood the success of a business had never rested solely on revenue reports or profit charts. It was measured in the breath, the eyes, and the smiles of the people who had made this brand. They were ordinary people, but with every sandwich, every cup of coffee, they had turned this place into a second home where warmth and trust always existed. Michael smiled gently, his heart filled with pride but also a tinge of regret. He knew Sunrise Breakfast Joint was not a cold empire but a home built from sweat, everyday stories, and small yet persistent dreams. That was something no number on a report could ever capture. Justice was not something distant, it existed right here in the way a CEO could stand up, admit mistakes, and put the right people in the right places. That was a powerful leadership lesson, a reminder to everyone that only when a business truly respects and protects its workers can it stand strong against the storms of the market and society. The value of a brand did not just lie in the logo on the sign or the number of branches, but in the eyes of the servers, the laughter of customers, and in the hearts of the people who had nurtured it day by day. And in that very place, in every small story, justice and hope always existed, waiting for a CEO brave enough to light them up.